Hello and good day. I am Coach Jay. I am an intrapersonal relationship coach, which basically means I help people help their relationship with themselves, because I always say the relationship you have with yourself sets the tone and standard for all relationships around you. I always start my class with a corny dad joke, usually compliments of my son. So today's is this. What kind of suits do lawyers wear to work? Lawyers wear lawsuits. Ba-dum-bum. All right, if you can take 2 deep healing breaths with me, preferably with your eyes closed, but whatever way you're comfortable and safe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Breathe in all that delicious oxygen. And breathe out tension, anxiety, stress. All right. So dissociation, what is it? With the topic of trauma becoming more influential in public arena, the narrative that surrounds this topic can become confusing. A related idea to trauma that may be unclear to many is dissociation. The word is a psychological construct, although dissociation carries physical symptoms. Dissociation begins in the mind. I want to shed some light on the topic of dissociation in this class from both the trauma perspective and then how dissociation can play a role in infidelity. So first, Dr. Sayer, the world-renowned physician who studies the neuroanatomical effects of trauma, suggests that dissociation is defined in terms of experiencing a sense of fragmentation in pieces, split, and broken up of the mind, and perception of the self and body. So it's a complete split of the mind, self, and body. The main ways dissociation may show up in a person is an altered view of the self, included derealization, depersonalization, and distortions of time, space, and body, which is why sometimes when people are in a dissociative state, it's hard for them to do any memory recall with certain things. Some professionals describe dissociation as a phobia of memories, in the form of the expression of excessive or inappropriate physical responses to thoughts or memories of old trauma. So a lot of times, if our body is having a memory of an old trauma, our body can go into a dissociative state. The basic mechanism of dissociation involves the splitting off of parts, memory, or perception in order to escape the anxiety that overwhelmed our coping mechanisms. So if we're emotionally flooding, if we're having a trigger, if we're driving down the street where we were once abused, we could go into a dissociative state, potentially. Classifying symptoms of dissociation is a challenge for clinicians because these symptoms assume many and varied forms of expressions. Some of these symptoms may be emotional, perceptual, cognitive, or functional. The symptoms individuals possess may involve the altered perception of time, space, sense of self, and reality. Some physical symptoms are expressions that frequently involve weakness and mental and emotional paralysis. I just want to say that, dissociation definitely messes with our time scale, our time spectrum. But what I also found interesting is that our hippocampus, which is in charge of a lot of our memory, that often gets kind of marred with trauma. So really, the traumatized brain is so unlike the untraumatized brain because there's so much going on, from dissociation to memory loss to hypervigilance. So, a lot of people have a traumatized brain, and we do not function as with somebody who doesn't have a traumatized brain. A major feature of the experience of dissociation is the freeze response. Freezing is a state of immobility, such as the body stops moving. Freezing is routinely seen in the wild. I don't know if you've ever watched these animal shows where an animal assumes an immobile state in the presence of a predator. This state actually may proceed to sudden flight, or if the fawn is attacked and captured by the predator, an animal will fall into a deeper state of freeze that is associated with unresponsive behavior. Sometimes if a lion is attacking a gazelle will just stay there in such fear it won't even move. Or sometimes if the lion is attacking a gazelle and the lion would just stay there and watch the gazelle, the gazelle's body might get up and move around, but its mind is somewhere else. In the event of an attack, the creature is rendered helpless. A different state of freezing appears in the creature. So in the 70s, an experiment exposed rats to a variety of predator-related stimuli in an open space with no means of escape. The results showed that all of the rodents entered a deep phase of freeze that could and lasted up to about 30 minutes. If a person is not allowed to react to a threat because of their coping mechanisms are overwhelmed, they may experience pain and suffering enough to disassociate down the line, which is important, which gets into, sometimes disassociating later on in life with trauma and infidelity and stuff. Yes, sorry, my notes say it right here, which is probably why those with a trauma background can disassociate with an affair partner better than those who do not come from a trauma past. I'm not saying everybody who breaks marriage vows has a trauma past, but a lot of people with a trauma past, I'm not saying that everybody with a trauma past breaks vows. That's not the case, but people that do break vows often do have a trauma past. It's like saying not all basketball players are, or not all tall people are basketball players, but all basketball players for the most part happen to be tall. The lack of recovery from freeze response may lead to stored energy that comes from a fight or a flight response that harms a person's functioning. Researchers in the field suggest that stored energy could lead to negative physical reactions. So for example, a person may be sick more frequently, may have more intestinal or digestive issues, and may also experience increased blood pressure. The combination of these ailments may create challenges for a human being to complete daily tasks, especially if there are flashbacks that resulted from the trauma that created the dissociation. I don't have to tell you, even from a small scale, when we're triggered from our traumas, let's just say of, whatever the reason you're here, oftentimes we can either get flashbacks or emotional flooding or triggers that literally can bring us to our knees. The emotional toll a flashback has on a brain and nervous system is devastating. Flashbacks may be episodes that involve often intense re-experiencing. Oftentimes when we're emotionally flooding, having a flashback, triggered, we are put right back in that situation where we feel very unsafe. Flashbacks can last minutes to several hours or even days. Some patients experience an out-of-body experience when they dissociate. During a flashback, a person may appear confused and detached from the present moment. A person's nervous system can only tolerate so much, and if the person may survive only by disassociating, then that's what they'll do. Which is why, and I don't want to get too graphic, why sometimes when you talk to younger people that were, say, sexually abused, they'll say, I actually came out of my body and I watched myself being abused. That's a form of dissociation. Although this state of mind helps many survive horrific situations, dissociation can also, unfortunately, assist in the realm of infidelity. Since dissociation is a mental process that causes a lack of connection between a person's thoughts, memory, and a sense of identity, a wayward spouse can call upon dissociation to forget that he is, quote, Jeff the CEO, with a wife and 5 children at home. When Jeff is with his mistress, Teresa, he can easily drop thoughts about who he is, his memories of his wife and his family, and drop his identity as a CEO. When Jeff is with his mistress, he again is a giddy teenager, exploring forbidden love and the body of a new woman, which makes the experience exciting for Jeff. The combination of forbidden and new is irresistible. Jeff is able to completely disconnect from his real life. suspend reality and live in a fantasy with Teresa where anything is possible. And while Teresa is able to block out all thoughts of his life outside of the affair. So basically, you know, when people that can disassociate or have disassociated in the past, if something happens in life where they're overwhelmed or their coping mechanisms are overwhelmed, they can more easily go into a dissociative state where they could almost live two different lives and be almost two completely different people. This leads us to dissociation's best friend, which is compartmentalization. After Jeff is finished seeing Teresa, he must compartmentalize the time he spent with her to alleviate the guilt and prevent any memories of his time with Teresa from rising up. Why? Because if he cannot compartmentalize Teresa, he will start acting strangely and his wife will start asking questions. Jeff's mind automatically compartmentalizes his affair with Teresa in order for him to completely be able to hide it. And what is compartmentalization, you might be asking? Compartmentalization is a subconscious psychological defense mechanism used to avoid reason, logic, and the anxiety caused from having conflicting values, emotions, beliefs within ourselves. So if you don't compartmentalize something, then what happens is that you are stuck with your virtue, your values, you constantly questioning them. Should I be doing this? This is wrong. So you have to compartmentalize it so none of those thoughts come in. Compartmentalization allows these conflicting ideas to exist by inhibiting acknowledgement between the two separate compartmentalized lives, which is what I just said. So Jeff will isolate the relationship with Teresa from the other life challenges, events, and from his wife and family. They're two completely different lives due to compartmentalization. And when you're with the affair partner, dissociation. Jeff will apply extreme focus on Teresa when with her and think only of her when he's with her, which is why a lot of times when somebody says, were you thinking of me when you were with her? No, they weren't. And it's not because they didn't love you. It's not because they didn't prioritize you. It's because if they did allow themselves to think of you, then all of these internal conflicts and turmoil would have to take place and they wouldn't be able to do what they're doing, but they disassociated, to do what they're doing. It doesn't make sense. Affairs don't make sense. But anyways, he will shut out all the other thoughts of a life outside Teresa when he's around her. And he has to, because if not, his guilt and shame will just consume him. Now, you're probably saying, well, guilt and shame should consume him to get him into this situation. Correct. But once he's in this situation, he needs to alleviate that guilt and shame. And that's from dissociating and compartmentalizing. Jeff will move the affair forward in incremental steps. Of course, that's not if he didn't get caught. Jeff will open a new compartment that contains justifications for the affair with Teresa. He will open up a compartment that labels Teresa as a soulmate, and this is to justify his actions. Again, because anything outside of this will have Jeff feeling guilt and shame and anxiety, and he has to push those aside. So the best way to push those aside is to disassociate and then start to compartmentalize. Jeff believes the love he has for Teresa is unlike any other love before, and this special love will now be marred by, he will not allow it to be marred by negativity or guilt. So in order to not let that happen, he needs to compartmentalize. Of course, you and I both know that the thoughts Jeff has that I just mentioned are both immoral and they're sheer lunacy. I mean, it's wrong to cheat on a spouse, bottom line, but guilt can be held at bay by compartmentalizing the affair. So again, the list above was a concrete example of the things that go through the minds of adulterers and how they compartmentalize the affair so that it does not affect the rest of their lives. And also, they're able to alleviate any guilt and shame of wrongdoing, which is why when D-Day happens and people have to come out of dissociation and compartmentalization, it is not only a complete flood for the person they betrayed, it is a complete flood and wake up call for the betrayer, because they no longer can hide in the closet of dissociation, and they can't compartmentalize anymore. Everything has to be on the table. So it is a profound emotional experience for both parties. Anyways, I understand this class was very content heavy, so, and it may be a tad confusing, but so is an affair, or so is stepping out of a relationship or breaking trust. An affair doesn't make sense, just like this class. Some of its content doesn't make sense. But an affair is just like this class. It's completely filled with chemicals in the brain taking over, such as dissociation and categorization, renders the human almost impossible to think logically. You can't think logically. And if you do, maybe that goes into some other realm, like, psycho, or, psychosis and things like that. But anyways, bottom line, these were some of the things that dissociation does, and dissociation helps us with, and also compartmentalization, to the point where it's almost two separate human beings living this. So again, it was pretty content heavy. You might have to go back and watch this again. But I hope you got something out of this class.